All right, this presentation is going to talk a little bit about fragments and run-ons, which is one of the most common errors that people make in their papers in terms of grammar. And so fixing fragments and run-ons and being able to write good sentences will be key in eliminating comma errors and writing really good sentences. So first of all, I'm going to define for you what a fragment is. So a fragment is a group of words that are used as a sentence but are not really a sentence. So usually it's an incomplete thought. You read it and you say to yourself, well, so what? What else happens? I need to add something to this. This just doesn't make sense by itself. So if you would check your sentences in your papers, you would find fragments because they would be those sentences that you kind of scratch your head on and you really need some more information to go with them. The actual definition is that a fragment is something that lacks a subject, a verb, or some other essential part. Most of the time, your fragments have a subject and a verb. The part that they're missing is that they don't make sense. And so we'll talk about that in a little bit. So the creator of your textbook talked about sentences and fragments in terms of Arnold's and Urkel's, and you can Google these too if you want to. The Arnold's are the Arnold Schwarzeneggers. They're those really strong sentences that can stand alone, stand by themselves, because they make sense. They include a subject, a verb, and they express a complete thought. Urkel's, on the other hand, from the sitcom Family Matters, they're kind of wimpy. They're weak, they're missing something, they're dependent on something else. And I'll show you the difference here. So in this first sentence, when the water mattress broke, we want to know, well, what happened? What happened when the water mattress broke? It seems as if it's incomplete. So it has a subject, it's talking about the mattress, and it says what it did, it broke, but we're missing something. We're missing that complete thought. So what we do to make it an Arnold, to make it a sentence, is we take this Urkel, this fragment, when the water mattress broke, and we add something to it. Sam swam out of bed. Completes the sentence, makes it a complete thought, tells us what happens when the mattress broke. The third sentence, to have flat feet and a head to match, is not a complete thought. It's a fragment. It's an Urkel. And so adding more words makes that an Arnold, a sentence. Our instructor has flat feet and a head to match. The fifth sentence, Tom sells toothless combs to bald men, is a sentence, has a subject, a predicate, and it is a complete thought. To sell combs to bald men is not a sentence. It doesn't make sense by itself. The next sentence, the bugs hitting my windshield, sentence fragment. The bugs hitting my windshield spilled their guts is a sentence. So there's some differences between fragments and sentences. All right, how do I correct fragments? Well, the first way, and maybe the easiest way, is to add some words. So here the example, more gas in Glenn than in his car, is a sentence fragment. Doesn't make sense on its own. So what I do is I don't necessarily add a sentence, that's probably an error, but I add some words. Glenn holds more gas in his stomach than in his car, which then creates a complete thought or a complete sentence. So I've added something else about Glenn so that it makes sense. Similarly, I can add words, but I can also delete words. And so I have a handout listed in the list of handouts underneath the sentence part that's called subordinating conjunction, coordinating conjunction list. And what you'll find are a list of these words that make things fragments. And so if you make sentences fragments, if you look at this sentence, when the crowd walked out, right now that's a sentence fragment. The reason why it's a sentence fragment is because it starts with the word when. If you look at your subordinating conjunction list, when is a subordinating conjunction. Anytime I add one of those words from the subordinating conjunction list to a sentence, it automatically makes it a fragment. So what I can do here to fix this fragment is simply delete the when. So now the sentence says the crowd walked out of the stadium, and that is a sentence. If I add a when, it makes it a fragment. If I take this same sentence, the crowd walked out of the stadium, and I add if, or if I add because, those are all on my subordinating conjunction list, and as a result, makes this sentence a fragment. So it will take it from being a complete thought into being a fragment. And this is a huge error that people make in terms of their writing. What they do is they stick a coordinating conjunction in front of of their sentence, and that makes it a fragment. So really look at those subordinating conjunctions and eliminate those from the beginnings of your sentences if that's all you have. If you add something to it, then we'll talk about that in the next section. But if you just have it in front of, like this sentence, in front of a sentence with the period right here, that makes it a fragment. All right, other ways to fix fragments. We can fix fragments using those subordinating conjunctions. And so what we can do with those is I'm asking you here to look at that subordinating conjunction list, and they're really famous words, words that are used a lot. And what you do with those is you use the subordinating conjunction to hook the fragment to a neighboring sentence, or you add to it using one of these subordinating conjunctions. And so here's an example. After the horse kicked my head, there's a period there, that makes it a fragment. So this is a subordinating conjunction. After the horse kicked my head, he limped away. Well, I see that I can easily add these two together, hook them together. I've already got my subordinating conjunction here. The rule is, if I use a subordinating conjunction at the beginning of a sentence, I need to include a comma. Where I include that comma is where the sentence would kind of naturally, it's a natural pause. So after the horse kicked my head, comma, he limped away. Now what I have created is a complex sentence. It's a different type of sentence structure. They're no longer simple sentences, which is good, no longer fragments. I've combined them to create this complex sentence. So using a subordinating conjunction at the beginning of a sentence means that I need to include a comma here. There's another rule, and I don't have it listed here, it'll be a little further on in the presentation, but if I include a subordinating conjunction in the middle of a sentence, which I can do that too, I don't need a comma. So that's where subordinating conjunctions can get a little confusing. All right, so now we're moving on from fragments into run-ons. Now run-ons are where you take two or more sentences and you just run them together. Sometimes you put a comma in between, sometimes there's no comma in between. And so there's two different kinds. We see a fused run-on in the first example. Martha lost her temper. She yelled at her boss. There's two thoughts there. This is where they should be split. The second is a comma splice. We have the same two sentences, but instead of no punctuation, there's a comma here. And what that signals is a comma splice. You can fix these in a lot of different ways, and we'll get into that in the next slide. So first of all, I can add a coordinating conjunction. Now an easy way to remember the coordinating conjunction is to list those as fanboys. So the coordinating conjunctions are words like for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. Again, really commonly used words. If you notice how we fixed that, Martha lost her temper, comma, and she yelled at her boss. So I have the same two sentences. I've combined them though with a comma and an and, or a comma and a fanboy. Here's another example. Martha yelled at her boss, comma, but she will not be fired. So what I've done is I've combined two sentences, again with the fanboy, this time I'm using the word but. Now the rule is, with using a fanboy, if I'm combining two sentences, I must have a comma before the conjunction, which is what you see. There's a comma before the and, there's also a comma before the but. Now I want to make this distinction. You use a comma and the conjunction only if you're combining two sentences. If I'm combining two words, Martha and Anne, obviously I don't use a comma. Or if I say Martha jumped and danced, no comma. Anytime I combine two sentences using a comma and a fanboy, I have to have a comma. Other ways to fix them, I can use a semicolon, and you can look at those examples here. They're really very simple to use. They're just like a period. The only thing that's different is the second sentence is lowercase. And so you'll see that here. It's a lowercase s on she. Here it's a lowercase s on she. This one uses what's called a conjunctive adverb. They're also at the very bottom of your subordinating conjunction list, so you can look at how to use those as well. I can very simply use a period. And so it's similar to using a semicolon, but instead here I have a capital letter. So I can always separate two run-on sentences with a period and a capital letter. Now here's where the rule gets a little tricky. I can write one as a subordinate, and this is when I'm going to use a subordinating conjunction list again. And it's a review from what we use with fragments. But what I can do here is I can include a subordinating conjunction. So I've picked the word when. When Martha lost her temper, comma, she yelled at her boss. That's a way to fix that sentence. All right, and just to go over the rule for subordinating conjunctions again, if I have a subordinating conjunction at the beginning of the sentence, I have to include a comma. And there's an example of that right here. Because the teacher is having surgery, the class will start later. There's an option for me using the subordinating conjunction in the middle of the sentence, and if that's the case, there is no comma that's needed. So here's my subordinating conjunction. I have a sentence that starts here, the class starts late, my subordinating conjunction, the teacher is having surgery, another sentence. And so what I've done is I've fused those two sentences together with a subordinating conjunction, the word because. And I hope you really take a look at that subordinating conjunction list, because it is something that you'll use hopefully regularly until you kind of become familiar with which words are subordinating and which ones are coordinating. All right, and just to review, this is if you're maybe more math-minded, these are kind of formulas that you can use to fix fragments and run-ons and how you can kind of gauge where you put your punctuation. So in the first example, I start with a sentence, I include a comma, I include one of the fanboys, and then I finish with another sentence. The second example, I have a sentence, semicolon, another sentence. Notice the S is lowercase on that second sentence. Then I have the two for subordinating conjunctions, and it starts with a fragment and then a comma. What that means is when I have the subordinating conjunction used at the beginning, it makes that sentence, what was a sentence, a fragment. And so if you remember that from when we were talking about fragments, adding a subordinating conjunction at the beginning of a sentence makes that a fragment, which is why it says fragment, comma, sentence. The last example, if I start with a sentence, I end with a fragment, and what that means is that there's a subordinating conjunction that's used in the middle. Again, whenever you put a subordinating conjunction at the beginning of a sentence, it automatically makes it a fragment, so that's why it's written that way. All right, and I thank you so much for listening to this presentation. I wish you the best of luck with sentences. Really, if you do master this, a lot of your comma errors will be eliminated, because this is probably 80% of all comma errors come through your sentences, through the use of subordinating and coordinating conjunctions. So as always, if you have any questions, please let me know. You will see that there are 2 quizzes that follow, so if you would please take those, that will let me know and help me to gauge your understanding.